I sat there at the Thanksgiving dinner table watching my father Harold carve the turkey with the same aggressive precision he used to tear apart my dreams. My mother, Patricia, passed around her famous stuffing while shooting disapproving glances in my direction. My siblings, Jennifer and Marcus, exchanged smirks as Dad launched into his annual lecture about my failures. 28 years old and still wasting your life on computer nonsense, he growled, waving the carving knife for emphasis. You're the family disappointment, Chauncey, a grown man living like a child. When I tried explaining my work, he exploded. Enough lies. Go live in the streets where failures belong. Mom nodded agreement. Don't come back until you're worth something. I quietly stood, smiled knowingly, and walked out. They had no idea I secretly owned cloud tech solutions worth $25 million. The cold November air hit my face as I stepped onto the suburban Denver sidewalk, leaving behind the warmth of my childhood home and the sting of my family's rejection. As I walked to my modest Honda Civic, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. If they only knew the truth about what I'd built in the shadows of their disapproval. 3 years ago, I made the decision that changed everything. I dropped out of the University of Colorado engineering program during my junior year. My parents went ballistic. Dad called me a quitter, Mom cried about wasted tuition money, and my siblings treated me like I'd contracted some contagious disease of laziness. They cut me off financially convinced that tough love would force me back to school. Instead, I moved into a cramped studio apartment in Boulder that smelled like old pizza and broken dreams. The place was barely 400 square feet with a Murphy bed that squeaked every time I rolled over, and a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls while standing in the middle. For months, I survived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, counting every dollar to make rent. I took a night job at The Grind, a 24-hour coffee shop near campus, where college students came to fuel their all-night study sessions. While they cramped for exams, I spent my downtime between customers working on something revolutionary. Every spare moment, I coded and refined an algorithm for cloud storage that would make data transfer faster and more secure than anything on the market. The breakthrough came on a snowy February morning, when I finally cracked the encryption problem that had been haunting me for months. My hands shook as I typed the final lines of code, knowing I'd created something that could change everything. But having a great idea and turning it into a business are two entirely different challenges. That's where Trevor came in. My former college roommate had always been the business-minded one while I focused on the technical side. When I showed him my algorithm, his eyes lit up like he'd seen the future. Within a week, we'd formed a partnership and started pitching to investors. Most venture capitalists laughed us out of their offices. 2 college dropouts with no business experience asking for seed money. It seemed impossible until we met Sarah Collins, a former tech executive who saw potential where others saw pipe dreams. She invested $2 million in exchange for 30% of the company, giving us the capital to hire programmers and rent office space. Cloud tech solutions grew faster than we'd ever imagined. Within 18 months, we had 47 employees working out of a gleaming office building in downtown Denver. Major corporations started signing contracts for our services, drawn to the superior speed and security our algorithm provided. Amazon, Microsoft, and even government agencies became clients, paying millions for access to our revolutionary technology. My 60% stake in the company made me worth $23 million on paper, but I lived like a monk. While Trevor bought a luxury car and moved to an upscale neighborhood, I kept driving my beat-up Honda and wearing thrift store clothes. I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed without changing who I was at my core. The hardest part was staying silent during family gatherings. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthday became an exercise in self-control, as my parents lectured me about responsibility and success. They thought I was still working at that coffee shop, scraping by as a failure to launch millennial. I'd practiced my story so many times I could recite it without thinking, still figuring things out, doing some consulting work, hoping something would break soon. But tonight was different. Something in my father's voice when he told me to live in the streets triggered a decision I'd been avoiding for years. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to show them exactly what their disappointing son had accomplished while they wrote him off as hopeless. I drove through the quiet suburban streets toward downtown Denver, watching the city lights grow brighter as I approached my real home. The luxury penthouse apartment I'd bought 6 months ago sat on the 32nd floor of the Millennium Tower, offering panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains and the sprawling city below. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, marble countertops, and a wine cellar I never used because I was too busy working to drink expensive bottles. As I rode the elevator to my floor, I wondered if keeping this secret had been about protection or pride. Did I stay quiet to shield myself from my family's potential jealousy, or because some part of me still craved their approval for who I was rather than what I owned? The answer probably lay somewhere in between, wrapped up in years of feeling like I had to prove myself worthy of their respect. Tomorrow, I'd return to the office and continue building something bigger than any of us had imagined. Cloud Tech was on track to go public within 2 years, which would multiply my wealth exponentially. But tonight, I sat in my empty penthouse, looking out at the city I'd conquered, while the people who should have been celebrating my success remained convinced I was a disappointment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd achieved more financial success than anyone in my family, yet I felt lonelier than ever. Money couldn't buy the one thing I wanted most: their belief in me. And after tonight, I wasn't sure that was possible anymore. The week following Thanksgiving passed in an uncomfortable haze of guilt and curiosity for my sister Jennifer. While I returned to my routine of board meetings and product development, she found herself unable to shake the image of me walking calmly out of our parents' house after such brutal rejection. Jennifer had always been different from the rest of the family. Where our parents saw black and white, she noticed shades of gray. As a social worker for Denver County, she'd learned to look beyond surface appearances and dig deeper when something didn't add up. And something about my reaction that night definitely didn't add up. Most people would have gotten angry, shouted back, or at least shown some emotion when being kicked out of their family home. Instead, I'd smiled and left like I knew something they didn't. That smile haunted Jennifer throughout her workdays and kept her awake at night, wondering what she'd missed. The following Tuesday, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of heading straight home from work, she drove to the last address she had for me, a rundown apartment complex in Boulder, where I'd supposedly been living since college. The building looked exactly like the kind of place their parents imagined their failure son would end up, with peeling paint and a parking lot full of dented cars. Jennifer climbed the stairs to apartment 2B and knocked on the door. An elderly woman in a floral housecoat answered, looking suspicious of unexpected visitors. "Excuse me, I'm looking for my brother Chauncey. He used to live here." The woman's expression softened with recognition. "Oh, that nice young man. He moved out about 6 months ago, paid his rent early every month, and never caused any trouble. Real polite boy, always said hello in the hallways." Jennifer felt her first flutter of confusion. Did he seem like he was struggling financially? I mean, did he ever have trouble paying rent? Mrs. Rodriguez laughed and shook her head. "Struggling, honey. He paid 6 months in advance when he moved out and gave me a $500 tip for keeping the place clean. Said he was moving somewhere nicer. Sometimes I'd see him getting out of different cars too, not just that little Honda he usually drove. Figured he was doing some kind of driving job, for rich folks." The conversation left Jennifer with more questions than answers. She drove home through Denver traffic, trying to reconcile the image of the struggling younger brother their parents described with the responsible tenant Mrs. Rodriguez remembered. Something wasn't adding up, and her social worker instincts kicked into high gear. Over the next few days, Jennifer started conducting her own investigation. She Googled my name and found it listed as a consultant for several major tech companies, including some she recognized from news articles about successful startups. The listings were vague but professional, suggesting I was involved in legitimate business activities rather than the odd jobs our parents assumed I was picking up. Her searches led her to Cloud Tech Solutions, a company she'd never heard of but whose website looked impressively professional. The employee photos showed a diverse group of young professionals in a modern office setting, but she didn't recognize any faces. The company described itself as specializing in advanced cloud storage solutions for enterprise clients, which meant absolutely nothing to Jennifer, but sounded important. By Friday, Jennifer's curiosity had infected our brother Marcus, a former Marine who worked private security for wealthy clients around Denver. Marcus had his own reasons for questioning the family narrative about my failures. During his military service, he'd learned to read people and situations, and my calm reaction on Thanksgiving had triggered his tactical awareness. "Something's not right about this whole thing," Marcus told Jennifer over coffee at a shop near her office. "Normal people don't just smile and walk away when their entire family turns against them. Either Chauncey's completely broken inside or he knows something we don't." They decided to work together, combining Jennifer's research skills with Marcus's surveillance experience. The following Saturday morning, they drove to the address Jennifer had found linked to my name in some business directories. Instead of another rundown apartment building, they found themselves staring at the Millennium Tower, one of Denver's most expensive residential complexes. The building's glass facade reflected the morning sun like a beacon of wealth and success. Valet parking attendants in crisp uniforms directed luxury cars to covered spaces. The lobby, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, looked like something from an upscale hotel, complete with marble floors and modern art installations. "There's no way Chauncey lives here," Marcus whispered as they sat in his pickup truck across the street. "This place probably costs more per month than Dad makes in 6 months." But as they watched, their certainty began to crumble. At 11:30 in the morning, I emerged from the building wearing a tailored business suit they'd never seen before. I spoke briefly with the doorman, who handed me keys to a sleek black BMW that definitely wasn't the Honda Civic I usually drove to family gatherings. Jennifer and Marcus followed at a distance as I drove to an upscale restaurant in downtown Denver. Through the window, they watched me meet with 3 people in expensive business attire, shaking hands and reviewing documents that looked official and important. The conversation appeared serious but friendly, with everyone taking notes and checking smartphones frequently. "He's meeting with lawyers or business executives," Marcus observed, using binoculars he'd brought from his security work. "Look at their body language. These aren't casual friends grabbing lunch. This is a professional meeting about something significant." The siblings spent the rest of the day discussing what they'd witnessed, trying to fit these new observations into their understanding of who I was supposed to be. The brother they thought they knew worked odd jobs and struggled to pay rent on a studio apartment. The person they'd been following lived in luxury and conducted business meetings with people who looked like they controlled serious money. When they presented their findings to our parents that evening, the reaction was exactly what they expected. Harold dismissed their observations as misunderstandings, insisting that I was probably working as a janitor or security guard in that fancy building. Patricia suggested I might be involved in something illegal, explaining how I could afford nice clothes and cars. "You kids watch too many movies," Harold said, settling into his recliner with a beer. "Chauncey's always been a dreamer, telling stories and pretending to be more important than he really is. He's probably working some entry-level job and using credit cards to live beyond his means. That's why he never talks about specifics when we ask about his work." But Jennifer and Marcus weren't satisfied with easy explanations. They'd seen too much that contradicted the family story, and their investigation was just beginning. The next week would bring revelations that would force everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the son and brother they'd written off as a failure. The truth was much more complicated than any of us realized, and it was about to collide with a crisis that would test everything I'd built. While my family debated whether I was a janitor or a criminal, I was facing the biggest threat Cloud Tech Solutions had ever encountered. The crisis started with what seemed like routine business intelligence. A competitor called TechFlow Industries had been asking questions about our clients and studying our public patents. Brandon Walsh, TechFlow's CEO, was someone I recognized from my past but had hoped never to encounter in business. We'd attended the same high school in Denver where he'd been the kind of student who peaked early star athlete class president, popular with everyone who mattered. I'd been the quiet kid who spent lunch periods in the computer lab invisible to people like Brandon. Apparently, invisibility was no longer an option. TechFlow had grown rapidly by acquiring smaller companies and absorbing their technologies, often through hostile takeovers that destroyed the original founders' dreams. When Brandon learned about CloudTech's success, he decided we'd make an excellent addition to his empire. The first sign of trouble came during a Monday morning meeting with our largest client, Richardson Financial Services. Their CTO, David Kim, called to inform us they were terminating our contract effective immediately. "I'm sorry, Chauncey," David said over the phone. "The decision came from our board of directors. They're concerned about CloudTech's long-term stability and decided to go with a larger provider." I'd worked with David for over a year. Richardson Financial had been thrilled with our service and had never expressed any concerns about stability. Something had changed their minds, and I suspected external pressure was involved. My suspicions were confirmed when Trevor burst into my office an hour later, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "We just lost 3 more clients," he announced, sinking into the chair across from my desk. "Hartley Manufacturing, Green Valley Hospital, and Sunset Real Estate. All of them cited concerns about our company's future." The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone was spreading rumors about CloudTech's stability, convincing our clients to jump ship before we supposedly sank. The campaign was sophisticated and targeted, hitting our most profitable accounts with surgical precision. That afternoon, I received a call from Brandon Walsh himself. His voice carried the same condescending tone I remembered from high school, but now it was wrapped in corporate politeness. "And Chauncey, good to hear you're doing well for yourself," he said with fake warmth. "I've been following CloudTech's progress, and I'm impressed with what you've built. That's actually why I'm calling. TechFlow would like to make an acquisition offer." The offer was $40 million for complete ownership of CloudTech, including all patents, client contracts, and employee agreements. It sounded generous on the surface, but I knew enough about corporate acquisitions to understand the real implications. Brandon would gut the company, fire most of our employees, and absorb our technology into TechFlow's existing platforms. Everything we'd built would disappear into his empire. "I appreciate the offer," I replied carefully, "but CloudTech isn't for sale." Brandon's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Everything's for sale, Chauncey. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Think about it over the next few days. Markets can be unpredictable, especially for smaller companies, without established track records." The threat was subtle but clear. If I didn't accept his generous offer, Brandon would continue attacking our business until we had no choice but to sell or declare bankruptcy. It was corporate warfare disguised as legitimate competition. Over the next week, the attacks intensified. Key employees started receiving job offers from TechFlow with salaries 50% higher than what we could afford. Our best programmers, Lisa Chen and Robert Martinez, gave their 2 weeks' notice on the same day. Without them, we'd struggle to maintain our current service levels, let alone develop new features. The rumors about our instability grew more sophisticated and targeted. Potential clients who had been enthusiastic about switching to CloudTech suddenly became unavailable for meetings. Industry publications started running articles about the challenges facing smaller cloud storage companies in an increasingly competitive market. But the worst betrayal came from someone I trusted completely. I discovered through an accidentally forwarded email that Trevor had been secretly meeting with TechFlow executives for the past month. The subject line read, "Confidential discussion. CloudTech acquisition terms." And the message thread revealed that my business partner was considering selling his shares without my knowledge. I confronted Trevor in his office on a Thursday evening after most employees had gone home. The conversation started professionally, but quickly became personal, as years of partnership and friendship collided with business realities. "You've been negotiating behind my back," I said, placing the printed emails on his desk. Trevor couldn't meet my eyes. His usually confident demeanor crumbled as he fumbled for explanations that sounded hollow even to him. "It's not what you think, Chauncey. They approached me with questions about the company structure. I was trying to gather intelligence about their intentions." Intelligence. These emails show you discussing valuation models and employee retention packages you're planning to sell. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Trevor looked up with tears in his eyes. "They know about my gambling debts. Brandon Walsh has friends in Las Vegas who've been tracking my casino visits. He threatened to expose everything to our investors and clients unless I cooperated." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Trevor's gambling addiction was something we'd discussed privately, and I thought he had it under control. Apparently, Brandon had done his homework on both of us, finding our weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. "How much do you owe?" I asked. $250,000. "The interest keeps growing every month, and some of these people don't accept late payments gracefully." Brandon offered to cover my debts in exchange for my cooperation with the acquisition. I spent that night walking through downtown Denver trying to process the magnitude of the crisis we faced. Cloud Tech was hemorrhaging clients and employees, while my business partner was being blackmailed into betrayal. We needed $8 million in emergency funding within 2 weeks to survive, but most of my personal wealth was tied up in company investments that couldn't be liquidated quickly. The irony was bitter and complete. I'd built a multi-million-dollar business while hiding my success from the family that had rejected me. Now, when I needed support the most, I was too proud to ask for help from the people who thought I was worthless. My independence had become a prison, and the key was an admission I wasn't sure I could make. Brandon Walsh had played his hand perfectly, using my own secrecy against me. He knew I couldn't reveal the truth about my success without destroying the protective barrier I'd built around my emotions. But as I stood on my penthouse balcony, looking out at the city lights that had once represented triumph, I realized that pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. The war for Cloud Tech's survival was about to begin, and I would need every ally I could find. The collision between my business crisis and my family's financial struggles happened with the kind of dramatic timing that would seem unbelievable in fiction, but felt devastatingly real in life. While I was fighting to save Cloud Tech from Brandon Walsh's corporate assault, my parents were facing their own battle against foreclosure. My father, Harold, had built his small plumbing business over 20 years through honest work and word-of-mouth referrals. Harold's Helper Plumbing had never made anyone rich, but it had provided a steady middle-class income that supported our family through my childhood. However, the economic downturn of the past year had hit small businesses particularly hard, especially those serving residential clients who were cutting back on non-emergency expenses. The final blow came when Harold suffered a minor heart attack in early December. The medical bills and recovery time devastated both his health and his finances. Unable to work for 6 weeks, he lost several major contracts to younger competitors who could promise faster service. By the time he recovered enough to return to work, Harold's Helper Plumbing was 3 months behind on equipment loans and struggling to pay basic overhead expenses. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning while Patricia was sorting through medical bills at the kitchen table. 28 years of mortgage payments, and they were 60 days away from losing the house where Jennifer, Marcus, and I had grown up. The irony was cruel. While their supposedly failed son was worth millions, his parents were about to become homeless. Jennifer discovered the notice while helping organize their financial paperwork. She'd been stopping by every few days since Thanksgiving, partly from guilt about the investigation she and Marcus had been conducting, but also because she sensed her parents needed support they were too proud to request. "Mom, what's this?" Jennifer asked, holding up the official-looking document with the bold header, Notice of default and election to sell. Patricia's face crumpled as months of hidden stress finally found release. We didn't want to worry you kids. Your father's been trying to negotiate with the bank, but they want the full amount plus penalties. We'd need $15,000 by January 15th to stop the foreclosure. The number hit Jennifer like a physical blow. $15,000 might as well have been $15 million for a family already drowning in debt. Her social worker salary barely covered her own expenses, and Marcus was between security contracts after his last client reduced their protective detail. That evening, Jennifer called an emergency family meeting at her apartment. Marcus arrived first, followed by their parents, who looked older and more fragile than Jennifer remembered. The stress of financial ruin was aging them rapidly, adding lines to their faces and weight to their shoulders that hadn't been there at Thanksgiving. "We need to talk about Chauncey." Jennifer began pulling out the folder of evidence she and Marcus had compiled during their investigation. Harold's reaction was immediate and predictable. "Absolutely not. I won't go begging to the son who can't even hold down a steady job. We'll figure this out ourselves." But Jennifer pressed forward, sharing everything they'd discovered: the luxury apartment building, the business meetings, the professional website listings. She showed them photos Marcus had taken of me getting into expensive cars and meeting with people who looked like corporate executives. "Dad, I think Chauncey might be more successful than we realized. The evidence suggests he's involved in some kind of legitimate business that's doing well." Patricia studied the photos with growing confusion. "These pictures show our son dressed like a businessman, meeting with people in suits. But that's impossible. He works odd jobs and lives in that terrible apartment." Marcus cleared his throat and delivered the information that would change everything. "Actually, Mom, he moved out of that apartment 6 months ago. The landlady said he paid 6 months' rent in advance and gave her a big tip when he left." The room fell silent as 3 family members processed information that contradicted years of assumptions. Harold was the first to speak, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that Jennifer had never heard before. "Even if Chauncey has some money, that doesn't change what happened on Thanksgiving. He walked out on this family without trying to defend himself or explain anything. If he was successful, why didn't he tell us?" It was Marcus who provided the answer that cut through everyone's defenses. "Maybe because every time he tried to explain his work, we shut him down and called him a liar. Maybe because we decided he was a failure before giving him a chance to prove otherwise." The conversation that followed was painful and necessary. For the first time since childhood, the 3 family members honestly examined their treatment of me over the past few years. They recalled instances where I'd tried to share excitement about projects or achievements only to be dismissed as unrealistic or delusional. They remembered how their questions about my work had always carried undertones of skepticism and disappointment. "We pushed him away." Patricia whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "We were so convinced he was failing that we couldn't see any other possibility." The decision to confront me directly came after hours of debate about pride, family loyalty, and the difference between asking for help and demanding explanations. They agreed that regardless of the foreclosure situation, they owed me an honest conversation about the assumptions that had driven us apart. The next evening, all 3 of them arrived unannounced at the Millennium Tower. The doorman's reaction told them everything they needed to know about how wrong they'd been. "Good evening. Are you here to see Mr. Chauncey? He's expecting you." The doorman's professional courtesy and immediate recognition meant I was a respected resident, not someone sneaking into the building for janitorial work. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor passed in stunned silence. When the doors opened directly into my penthouse foyer, Patricia actually gasped. The apartment was beautiful, in ways their middle-class suburban home had never been. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture that belonged in magazine spreads, and an open floor plan that spoke of wealth and sophisticated taste. I arrived home 20 minutes later to find my family sitting awkwardly in my living room, looking like they'd been transported to an alien planet. The confrontation that followed was 3 years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings, compressed into 2 hours of raw honesty. Why didn't you tell us? Was Patricia's first question after the initial shock wore off. My answer came from a place of pain I'd been hiding since college. Because every time I tried to explain what I was building, you called me a dreamer or a liar. Because you decided I was a failure before I had a chance to succeed. Because I wanted to prove I could make it without your approval or support. The conversation revealed wounds on both sides. They genuinely believed they were motivating me through tough love, while I'd interpreted their skepticism as rejection and contempt. The gap between intention and impact had grown into a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. But the foreclosure crisis created urgency that forced past hurts aside. When Harold finally admitted they were losing the house, my response surprised everyone, including myself. "I'll take care of the mortgage," I said without hesitation. "But I want something in return. I want a real relationship with this family based on mutual respect. No more lectures about responsibility or success. No more assumptions about my life or decisions. We start over as adults who actually listen to each other." The agreement we reached that night established ground rules for rebuilding our family relationships. I would help them financially, but they would treat me as an equal partner in family decisions, rather than a child who needed constant guidance. Harold would accept my investment in modernizing his plumbing business, while Jennifer and Marcus would consider job opportunities at Cloud Tech if they were interested. As they prepared to leave that evening, Patricia pulled me aside for a private conversation that encapsulated the evening's emotional journey. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," she said, her voice thick with tears. "But I'm ashamed of how we treated you. We let our fears about your future blind us to your present reality. I don't know if you can forgive us, but I hope you'll give us a chance to do better." The forgiveness came easier than I'd expected. Holding on to anger had been exhausting, and I was ready to invest that energy in building something positive instead. But as my family drove home that night, none of us realized that our reunion was happening at the worst possible time. Brandon Walsh's assault on Cloud Tech was about to escalate into warfare, and my newfound family unity would soon face its first and most dangerous test. The integration of my family into my business life happened faster than anyone expected, driven by necessity and the genuine desire to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by years of misunderstanding. Within a week of our confrontational reunion, the foreclosure crisis was resolved, and my parents were beginning to see their son in an entirely new light. I paid off their mortgage and outstanding debts with a single wire transfer that represented less than 5% of my liquid assets. For Harold and Patricia, it was a financial miracle that saved their home and dignity. For me, it was the first time I'd been able to use my success to directly help the people I loved most, despite our complicated history. But the real transformation came when I offered Harold a partnership in expanding his plumbing business rather than just a bailout. My proposal was straightforward. I would invest $200,000 to modernize his equipment, expand his workforce, and develop a digital marketing presence that could compete with larger companies. In exchange, Harold would maintain operational control while I provided business strategy and financial backing. "I don't understand half of what you're talking about with websites and customer management systems," Harold admitted during our first official business meeting. "But I know plumbing and I know customer service. If you handle the computer stuff, I can handle everything else." The partnership worked because it respected both of our strengths instead of pretending our skills were interchangeable. Harold had 20 years of experience in residential and commercial plumbing relationships with suppliers, and a reputation for honest work that money couldn't buy. I brought modern business practices, marketing expertise, and enough capital to scale operations rapidly. Jennifer's integration into Cloud Tech was equally natural, but for different reasons. Her background in social work had developed communication skills that translated perfectly to marketing and public relations. She understood how to connect with people emotionally, which was exactly what our corporate messaging had been missing. Your website sounds like it was written by robots for other robots, Jennifer observed after spending a day reviewing our marketing materials. Potential clients want to know how your technology will solve their problems, not how many terabytes of encrypted data you can process per second. Marcus presented a different opportunity. His military and private security background made him invaluable for assessing the physical and digital security threats that were becoming more serious as TechFlow escalated their attacks. He immediately identified vulnerabilities in our office building and computer systems that could have been exploited by competitors with sufficient resources and motivation. Someone's been watching this building, Marcus reported, after conducting a security assessment of our headquarters. I've spotted the same vehicle parked across the street on 3 different days, and there's evidence that someone tried to access the building's wireless network from the parking garage. The family's involvement in my business created a support system I hadn't realized I desperately needed. For 3 years, I'd been making decisions alone, carrying the stress of leadership without anyone to share the burden. Suddenly, I had advisors who cared about my success for personal rather than financial reasons. But this new alliance faced its first major test when Brandon Walsh escalated his assault on cloud tech beyond corporate tactics into outright sabotage. The attack came through Danny Rodriguez, one of our former programmers, who had accepted a position with TechFlow the previous month. Danny had been a solid employee but not a key player in our development team. However, his access to our internal systems during his employment had given him knowledge of our security protocols and server architecture. When he planted a virus in our backup systems during his final week of employment, the delayed activation caught us completely off guard. The virus was sophisticated and targeted, designed to corrupt client data in ways that would look like system failures rather than sabotage. Over a weekend, when our monitoring staff was reduced, the malicious code activated and began systematically destroying backup files for 3 of our largest remaining clients. I received the emergency call at 6 in the morning from our head of IT security. "Chauncey, we've got a major problem. The backup systems for Richardson Financial Hartley Manufacturing and Green Valley Hospital have been compromised. We're looking at potential data loss for thousands of files." The implications were catastrophic. If we couldn't restore our clients' data, Cloud Tech would face lawsuits that could bankrupt the company. Even worse, the breach would destroy our reputation in an industry where trust and security were fundamental requirements for success. The family response was immediate and coordinated in ways that surprised everyone, including myself. Harold used his network of contractors to identify building maintenance workers who might have witnessed suspicious activity around our offices. Jennifer leveraged her contacts in local government to expedite the police investigation into corporate sabotage. Marcus implemented emergency security protocols and began conducting background checks on all employees who had access to sensitive systems. But the most crucial support came from an unexpected source. Trevor, racked with guilt about his secret negotiations with TechFlow, finally revealed the full extent of Brandon Walsh's campaign against our company. "He knows about your family situation," Trevor confessed during an emergency meeting in my penthouse. "Brandon's been following your personal life, waiting for the right moment to apply maximum pressure. He figured you'd be isolated and vulnerable, making you more likely to accept his acquisition offer." The revelation that Brandon had been conducting surveillance on my family transformed our defensive strategy into something more aggressive. Marcus's military training kicked in as he began planning what he called intelligence gathering operations against TechFlow's leadership. "If they want to play dirty, we need to understand exactly how dirty they're willing to get," Marcus explained. "I have contacts in private investigation and corporate security who can help us learn what Brandon Walsh is really hiding." The federal investigation into our data breach brought both good news and alarming revelations. FBI cybercrime specialists confirmed that the virus had been planted internally and traced its origin to Danny Rodriguez's work computer. but they also discovered evidence that TechFlow had been conducting industrial espionage against multiple competitors, using similar tactics to steal technology and destroy businesses. Mr. Walsh's company has been under federal surveillance for the past 6 months. Agent Sarah Thompson explained during a meeting at our offices. We've been building a case against them for corporate espionage and racketeering. Your situation provides the evidence we need to move forward with arrests. The FBI wanted me to cooperate in a sting operation to record Brandon admitting to his criminal activities. The plan was dangerous but straightforward. I would arrange a meeting to discuss his acquisition offer while wearing a wire to capture incriminating statements. My family's reaction to the FBI proposal revealed how much our relationships had evolved since Thanksgiving. Instead of trying to protect me from risk or questioning my judgment, they immediately began planning how to support the operation and ensure my safety. "I'll be your backup," Marcus volunteered. "I can position myself nearby with communication equipment in case something goes wrong." Jennifer's contribution was equally valuable, but focused on managing the crisis communications that would inevitably follow Brandon's arrest. Once this becomes public, you'll need to control the narrative to protect Cloud Tech's reputation. I can prepare press statements and coordinate with industry publications to ensure accurate reporting. Harold's support was more emotional, but equally important. "I'm proud of you for standing up to this bully," he said with genuine conviction. "I spent years thinking you needed to learn how to be tougher, but it turns out you're the toughest one in the family." The sting operation was scheduled for the following Friday at a neutral location, the restaurant where Brandon and I had our initial conversation about the acquisition. As I prepared to face the man who had threatened everything I'd built, I realized that my family's belief in me had become the foundation for a courage I'd never known I possessed. The war for Cloud Tech's survival was entering its final phase, and I wouldn't be fighting alone. The week leading up to the FBI sting operation transformed my family from spectators into active participants in corporate warfare. Each member contributed unique skills that proved invaluable as we prepared to take down Brandon Walsh's criminal enterprise and save Cloud Tech from destruction. Harold's contribution came through his extensive network of contractors and building maintenance workers throughout Denver. His 20 years in the plumbing business had created relationships with people who worked in every major commercial building in the city, including TechFlow Industries' headquarters in downtown Denver. "I've got a guy who does regular maintenance at TechFlow's building," Harold explained during our planning session. "Tommy Jenkins has been working there for 15 years, and he's noticed some strange activity in the basement level. Apparently, there's a restricted area with heavy-duty cooling systems that doesn't match any of the building's official floor plans." This information proved crucial when Marcus used his military contacts to investigate TechFlow's infrastructure. His former commanding officer now worked as a consultant for commercial construction projects and was able to access building permits and utility records that revealed discrepancies in TechFlow's official documentation. "They're drawing 3 times more electricity than their office space should require," Marcus reported. "Either they're running a cryptocurrency mining operation or they've got a massive server farm that's not supposed to exist." Jennifer's marketing expertise became our secret weapon for gathering intelligence about TechFlow's internal operations. She created fake profiles on professional networking sites and began connecting with current and former TechFlow employees, extracting information through seemingly innocent conversations about industry trends and career opportunities. "Brandon's been pushing employees to work excessive hours while cutting benefits and job security," Jennifer discovered. "Morale is terrible, and several people are actively looking for new positions. I think we could convince some of them to share information about the company's questionable practices." The breakthrough came when Jennifer made contact with Lisa Patterson, TechFlow's former director of human resources, who had been fired 3 months earlier for questioning the company's employee surveillance policies. Lisa agreed to meet with Jennifer at a coffee shop near the University of Denver, away from downtown areas where TechFlow employees might recognize her. "Brandon Walsh is running a criminal organization disguised as a tech company," Lisa revealed during their 2-hour conversation. The legitimate business is just a front for stealing intellectual property from competitors and selling it to international clients. Lisa provided documentation that TechFlow had been systematically infiltrating competitor companies, stealing proprietary technology, and reselling it to clients in countries where intellectual property laws were difficult to enforce. The operation was sophisticated and profitable, generating millions of dollars in illegal revenue while destroying smaller companies like Cloud Tech. He specifically targeted your company because he remembered you from high school, Lisa explained. Brandon has a list of people he thinks wronged him or didn't give him proper respect back then. Taking down Cloud Tech was as much about personal revenge as business profit. The evidence Lisa provided was exactly what FBI agent Sarah Thompson needed to expand her investigation. The documentation showed a pattern of criminal activity spanning multiple years and involving dozens of victim companies across the technology industry. We've been waiting for this kind of detailed evidence, Agent Thompson explained during an emergency meeting at our offices. Ms. Patterson's documentation gives us probable cause for search warrants and asset seizure orders, but we still need Mr. Walsh's recorded confession to ensure conviction on the most serious charges. The sting operation was planned for Friday evening at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant, where Brandon and I had conducted our original acquisition discussion. The FBI equipped me with a wireless microphone sophisticated enough to pick up conversation from across a table while remaining undetectable during casual inspection. Marcus positioned himself at the bar with a clear view of our table, while federal agents occupied strategic locations throughout the restaurant. Jennifer monitored social media and local police scanners from her apartment, ready to coordinate emergency communications if the situation went wrong. The meeting almost didn't happen. Brandon arrived 30 minutes late, claiming he'd been delayed by an emergency board meeting. His appearance shocked me. The confident corporate executive I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked exhausted and paranoid. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he kept checking his phone every few minutes. "Chauncey, I appreciate you reconsidering our acquisition offer," Brandon began, but his voice lacked the smooth confidence I remembered from our previous conversations. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding market instability," I replied following the script Agent Thompson had provided. "Cloud Tech has faced some unexpected challenges recently, and your offer might be worth discussing." Brandon's reaction was immediate and revealing. His entire demeanor changed as he realized I might be willing to surrender. The exhausted paranoia disappeared, replaced by the predatory enthusiasm I remembered from high school. "I knew you'd see reason eventually," he said, leaning forward with renewed energy. "Smart entrepreneurs know when to cut their losses and move on to new opportunities." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in corporate confession. Brandon bragged about the sophisticated methods TechFlow used to destroy competitor companies, describing industrial espionage as legitimate business intelligence and corporate sabotage as creative marketing strategies. "We've been monitoring your company's communications for months," he admitted with obvious pride. "Danny Rodriguez was feeding us information about your client relationships and internal operations long before he officially joined our team." But the most damaging revelation came when Brandon described his long-term strategy for dominating the cloud storage industry through criminal means. "Why compete fairly when you can eliminate competition entirely?" he asked rhetorically. "We've acquired 7 companies in the past 2 years using similar tactics. Steal their technology, destroy their reputation, then buy their assets for pennies on the dollar." The wire captured everything: admissions of industrial espionage, corporate sabotage, employee bribery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. When Brandon revealed that TechFlow was planning to expand these tactics against larger companies, including Amazon and Microsoft, Agent Thompson decided they had enough evidence to proceed with arrests. The takedown happened so quickly that Brandon didn't realize what was occurring until federal agents were placing him in handcuffs. His expression of shocked disbelief transformed into rage as he understood that our entire conversation had been recorded. "You think you've won something," Brandon shouted as agents led him away. "I've got connections you can't imagine. This arrest won't stick, and when I get out, I'll destroy everything you've ever built." But Brandon's threats proved empty as the scope of the federal investigation became clear. The FBI simultaneously raided TechFlow's offices, seizing servers and financial records that documented years of criminal activity. The basement server farm Harold had discovered contained stolen intellectual property from dozens of companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal revenue. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Within 72 hours, federal prosecutors had filed charges against Brandon Walsh for racketeering, conspiracy wire fraud, and corporate espionage. His assets were frozen, pending civil lawsuits from victim companies, and TechFlow Industries was placed under federal receivership. The family celebration that night was subdued but meaningful. We'd won a decisive victory against someone who had threatened everything I'd worked to build, but the cost had been enormous. The stress of the past month had aged all of us, and the realization of how close we'd come to losing everything left us emotionally drained. "I never imagined business could be this dangerous," Patricia said, as we sat in my penthouse living room watching news reports about Brandon's arrest on television. Harold's response captured the mixture of pride and exhaustion we all felt. Sometimes standing up to bullies requires more courage than any of us knew we had. But that's what families do for each other. The victory was complete, but the real test would come in rebuilding what had been damaged and creating something stronger than before. The aftermath of Brandon Walsh's arrest unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of justice that restored my faith in the possibility of good triumphing over corruption. The federal case against him was so comprehensive and well documented that his defense attorneys recommended a plea agreement rather than risk a trial that would likely result in a life sentence. Brandon pleaded guilty to 47 felony charges, including racketeering conspiracy to commit wire fraud, industrial espionage, and money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the prime years of his life reflecting on the consequences of his choices. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the high school golden boy who had peaked early would now fade into complete obscurity behind bars. TechFlow Industries collapsed within weeks of the federal raid as investigators discovered that the company's legitimate revenue was insufficient to support its operations without criminal income. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed that Brandon had been operating essentially a Ponzi scheme, using money stolen from new victims to pay operational expenses and create the illusion of profitability. For Cloud Tech, Brandon's downfall created opportunities beyond anything I had imagined possible. The federal government embarrassed that their own agencies had been purchasing services from a criminal organization, fast-tracked security clearances, and awarded us exclusive contracts worth over $50 million. Our revolutionary cloud storage algorithm, proven secure against sophisticated attacks, became the gold standard for government and military applications. The employee exodus that had threatened our survival reversed dramatically as word spread through the industry about our role in exposing TechFlow's criminal operations. Lisa Chen and Robert Martinez, the programmers who had left for higher salaries, requested to return and accepted pay cuts to rejoin a company they now recognized as ethically superior to its competitors. But the most satisfying transformation occurred within my family, as each member found new purpose and success through our coordinated efforts to rebuild and expand our various businesses. Harold's Plumbing Company evolved from a struggling one-man operation into the premier residential and commercial plumbing service in the Denver metropolitan area. My investment in modern equipment and Jennifer's marketing expertise attracted corporate clients who valued reliability and professionalism over lowest bid pricing. Within 6 months, Harold had hired 12 full-time employees and was considering expansion into Colorado Springs and Fort Collins. I never thought I'd be running meetings with lawyers and accountants, Harold admitted during one of our weekly family dinners. But it turns out, the business skills I learned from plumbing translate pretty well to managing people and solving complex problems. Jennifer discovered that her natural communication abilities made her exceptionally valuable in the technology industry, where brilliant engineers often struggled to explain their innovations to non-technical audiences. She launched her own marketing consultancy with Cloud Tech as her anchor client, quickly attracting other technology startups who needed help translating complex concepts into compelling business narratives. Working with Chauncey taught me that marketing isn't about manipulation, Jennifer explained during an interview with Denver Business Journal. It's about helping people understand how technology can solve real problems in their lives. Marcus leveraged his military background and recent corporate security experience to establish a private security firm specializing in protecting technology companies from industrial espionage and corporate sabotage. The FBI investigation had revealed how vulnerable most businesses were to sophisticated attacks, creating a market demand that Marcus was uniquely qualified to address. The Brandon Walsh case taught me that business competition can be just as dangerous as military conflict, Marcus said during his company's launch event. The difference is that corporate warriors need different weapons, information security, employee background checks, and counter surveillance rather than bullets and bombs. The personal reconciliation within our family deepened as we worked together toward shared goals, rather than competing for approval or recognition. The weekly family dinners that had once been exercises in judgment and criticism became collaborative planning sessions where everyone's contributions were valued equally. 1 year after the confrontation that had nearly destroyed our relationships, we gathered for a very different kind of Thanksgiving celebration. Instead of my parents' cramped dining room where old grievances had festered, we met in the penthouse conference room that had become our unofficial family headquarters. The guest list reflected how much had changed. Trevor joined us as Cloud Tech's fully rehabilitated partner, his gambling addiction successfully treated, and his loyalty to our company proven through months of dedicated work. Lisa Patterson, the former TechFlow employee whose courage had helped expose Brandon's crimes, had become Jennifer's business partner and close family friend. Even Agent Sarah Thompson accepted our invitation, bringing her husband and twin daughters for an evening of celebration rather than investigation. Harold stood to offer the blessing, but his words addressed transformation rather than gratitude for material abundance. A year ago, we were a family divided by pride and misunderstanding. He began his voice, carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. We let our fears about the future blind us to the present reality of who our children had become. We're gathered tonight not just to celebrate material success, but to acknowledge that real wealth comes from people who love you enough to forgive your mistakes and give you opportunities to do better. Patricia's response captured the emotional journey we'd all traveled together. I spent so many years worrying about whether Chauncey would be successful that I couldn't see he was already successful in ways that mattered more than money. He was kind, honest, hardworking, and loyal to his family, even when we didn't deserve that loyalty. The conversation that followed wasn't about business achievements or financial milestones, but about the lessons we'd learned through crisis and reconciliation. Marcus spoke about how military service had taught him to value loyalty above individual achievement, but family conflict had shown him that loyalty without communication was worthless. Jennifer shared her discovery that her social work skills were valuable in business contexts, proving that helping people and making money weren't mutually exclusive goals. Trevor's contribution was perhaps the most profound, as he described how gambling addiction had nearly destroyed not only his personal life, but also the friendship and business partnership that meant more to him than any amount of money. Brandon Walsh used my weaknesses against me. But that experience taught me that running away from problems only makes them bigger, Trevor said. Real strength comes from admitting when you need help and accepting support from people who care about your success. The evening's most emotional moment came when I presented my parents with a gift that represented our journey from estrangement to alliance, a framed photograph of Harold's Helper, Plumbing's new headquarters, a modern facility that employed 15 people and served clients throughout Colorado. This building represents what we can accomplish when we combine your experience with new opportunities, I explained. But more importantly, it proves that success means different things to different people, and all of those definitions can coexist in the same family. As our guests prepared to leave that evening, Agent Thompson pulled me aside for a conversation that provided closure to the federal investigation and validation for the risks we'd taken to achieve justice. Brandon Walsh will serve every day of his 25-year sentence, she assured me. But more importantly, the evidence we gathered from TechFlow has led to investigations of similar criminal organizations in 12 other states. Your willingness to cooperate in dangerous circumstances has protected hundreds of other businesses from the same attacks you survived. The final moments of that Thanksgiving evening belonged to our immediate family, as we sat together in comfortable silence watching the city lights twinkle below us. The view from my penthouse windows encompassed the suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up feeling like a misunderstood failure, the downtown business district where I'd built an empire while hiding my success, and the vast Colorado landscape that had taught all of us about resilience and reinvention. Patricia broke the peaceful silence with a question that addressed the heart of our shared experience. What would have happened if we'd known the truth about your success from the beginning? Would things have been different? My answer came from a place of hard-earned wisdom about the relationship between struggle and growth. We needed to go through this conflict to understand each other. If you'd known about my success immediately, you might have been proud, but not necessarily respectful. If I'd revealed everything at the beginning, I might have felt vindicated, but not necessarily mature. Sometimes families have to break apart before they can rebuild themselves stronger. Harold's final words that night provided the perfect conclusion to our journey from dysfunction to unity. The best part about making mistakes is that they give you opportunities to prove you can learn from them. This family is proof that people can change, relationships can heal, and success means whatever you decide it means. The story that began with rejection and secrets ended with acceptance and transparency. Brandon Walsh's attempt to destroy Cloud Tech had inadvertently forced my family to confront our dysfunctional communication patterns and rebuild our relationships on foundations of mutual respect rather than assumed authority. Cloud Tech continued growing, eventually going public in an initial offering that valued the company at over $200 million. But the real measure of success wasn't financial. It was the satisfaction of building something meaningful with people who shared my values and supported my vision. As I reflect on this transformative year, I realize that the most valuable lesson wasn't about business strategy or family dynamics, but about the courage required to be vulnerable with people whose opinions matter most to you. Sometimes the greatest risk isn't financial or professional, but emotional. The possibility that the people you love might not love you back the way you need them to. But taking that risk opened possibilities that pride and independence could never achieve. My family's support during the crisis with Brandon Walsh provided strength I couldn't have found alone. Their diverse skills and perspectives made every aspect of our businesses stronger and more sustainable. Most importantly, their belief in my character, rather than just my achievements, gave me confidence to take risks and pursue opportunities that seemed impossible when I was fighting alone. Have you ever had to choose between pride and family when facing a major crisis? How did you balance independence with the need for support from people who love you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more content about overcoming family conflicts and building meaningful success. Share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that real strength sometimes comes from admitting you need help. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the courage to rebuild whatever relationships in your life might need a fresh start.